It's time for Tri-City Sports Now, segment number 4. I'm Marky Bilson. You want to know why I almost always ignore the NBA and would rather give you the NHL? One thing, we've got a team in the state. Yeah, Memphis doesn't count. That's not the state, right? East Tennessee. Where is that? You know, on and off, I've lived in Tennessee since 1986. I've been to Memphis once. That was for an hour as a changing planes in the airport. I did have at 9 a.m. for breakfast delicious ribs. I did make sure I had that in the airport, but other than that, did I go down, listen to the blues on Beale Street? No. Maybe I'm lesser for that. But then again, as it is always said, we're closer to Canada than we are Memphis, and perhaps closer culturally as well. So that's another reason why I like to talk hockey over the NBA. The other reason I like to do it is stories like this, where I begin to say, I don't want this person listening to my show. No, I really don't. I don't want to put that person into my good sponsors' stores and establishments. And what I'm talking about, a man was arrested last week for sending a threatening email to the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, who, yes, looks like some sort of, film villain. But anyway, looking at the picture right here, you judge for yourself. I know. So that a couple of years ago, we're talking about the legalization of sports gambling. Silver has been ahead of the curve on this, so you got to give him that. But, boy, yes, you do. Anyway, lasers are going to take the glasses off. Lasers will shoot out of the man's eyes and all that. I'm not telling any original joke here. Anyway, this was an original way to try to make the NBA. The New York Post reports that David Pyant of Queens was arrested last week after he sent an email to Adam Silver threatening to come up there and kill you with my effing gun. So that character element in the NBA, he thought he just fit right in, and all this. Now, police say that Pyant was demanding that Silver let him play in the National Basketball Association. There's no record of this man playing basketball anywhere. Pyant, however, does have 13 prior arrests and has served time in prison for robbery. Lovely. Yeah, not a fit. And I guess, it's that sort of fan that causes me to say, you know what, NBA, no. No, I just, it's another reason. You look at, there was a threat. I know it happens in football, too. There was a threat directed at people, what was it? A man in Florida, his home was raided last month after a threat he directed to the Dallas Cowboys. Why don't you sign me? That sort of thing. So, delusional person thinking that he can be a professional athlete and he's going to be all, real big and all this. Well, I don't really, never rooted for the Cowboys that much either, come to think of it. But anyway, why? I'm much happier talking NHL than the NBA. Games are better. I got it. You hear I was, after the show last afternoon, pulling out in my car, listening to 1420 NBC Sports Radio Tri-Cities and Colin Cowherd, and I'm listening to him say how more than half the playoff games in the NBA have just been absolute blowouts. 37 of 65 games. It comes down to, again, just watch the last 2 minutes, and we're back to that point already. Nobody really says that about football. And speaking, by the way, of the Dallas Cowboys in football, yesterday USA Football released the totals, because everybody else was too lazy to count it up, on what states produced the most players into the NFL draft. And it shows another picture of how I think that Tennessee has at least an 0-1 count against them when it comes to competing, especially for, against their SEC brethren. and maybe even Virginia Tech as well. Last year, in the last NFL draft, 35 states were, listen to me, 38 states were represented. 35 players were drafted from Florida. Florida. Our women are the fairest. Our men are the squarest. Okay, there you go. But anyway, the state of Florida produced 35 players in last month's NFL draft. Then came California and Texas. After Florida's 35, both California and Texas had 27. How about this? The number 4 state borders East Tennessee. The Old Dominion, Virginia. Not just for lovers anymore. Number 5 state, also borders East Tennessee. North Carolina. They've got 14 players drafted last year. The number 5 state. My goodness, the number 6 state. Number 6 state. Also, there it is, bordering East Tennessee again. I think you can figure it out. It's Georgia. They had 12, tied with Pennsylvania, as a matter of fact. Now, interesting thing here is that Georgia last year led all states, even over Florida and California, in the amount of players drafted by the NFL. Georgia last year had 29. This year they only have 12. Very interesting. Rounding out the list, 8th most prolific state for producing football players, Louisiana, followed by Alabama at 10 players for the 9th best. The 10th best, it's a tie, New Jersey. Rutgers never wins, but Bill Parcells, you figure they have, the linemen there, usually populated state. 8 players drafted last month by the NFL, but they're tied with Mississippi. The Magnolia State also has 8. So breaking that down, what this means is that in a per capita, the best state in the country for producing football players is, in fact, Mississippi. Or at least players that are drafted by the NFL. I found that to be very interesting. 1 out of every 371,000 people in Mississippi were drafted by the NFL last year. That's better than most, Powerball numbers, Louisiana was, in terms of per capita, number 2. Delaware was number 3. They had 2 players. There are fewer than 900,000 residents in Delaware. Then comes Alabama, 4th most per capita, and Virginia with 8 million people. That's 1 NFL player per 533,000 Virginians drafted last year. 15 players drafted out of Virginia. Well, there you go. That's one of the reasons why I think Virginia Tech has been more successful, Battle of Bristol notwithstanding, than Tennessee in recent years. Just to give you an idea, Tennessee, how many players were drafted from the Volunteer State? Are you ready for this? I know you are. I had it right here on the tip. 5. That's all. 5. Which ties it, are you ready for this? With, let's see here, Maryland is 12th, Michigan and Ohio, their numbers are down, are 13th. It ties Tennessee with Colorado and Illinois for number, give me a minute here, 12, 13, 14, for 15th. I guess one could do worse than tying the states of Denver and Chicago, but still, 17th most populated state. Maybe that fits in about, reasonably, about right, you'd say, but per capita, yeah, it's just average. And I've mentioned this before, Tennessee is up against it. They, don't have the same amount of players that are drafted out of neighboring states that play pro football. Certainly Florida, which is why Tennessee seems to lose to Florida every year, but also Alabama, Georgia, why Georgia wins the SEC East. I mean, now here's something I found very interesting. South Carolina, which has produced a lot of NFL players over the years, South Carolina has produced, I believe, their top 10 in NFL player production. And I've mentioned this before, that in '98, the entire defensive line of the University of Tennessee, the national championship team, they were South Carolinians. But that year, South Carolina was 1-10, and Clemson was 3-8. That's not happening again. Those players are going to Columbia or Clemson. They're not going to Knoxville these days. And I'm not sure you can really expect them to do so. Anyway, though, this was a really down year for South Carolina. So does that mean that the Gamecocks and Tigers are due to fall? Is South Carolina not putting out the players that they used to? Something possibly to look for. South Carolina put as many players out as Nevada, and for that matter, Basketball State, Indiana. For that matter, South Carolina only had 2 more players than were from Australia in the NFL draft. Think about that. The most prolific high school, by the way, putting 3 players in the draft from St. Petersburg, Florida, Lakewood. Isaiah Wynn, first-round pick, lineman from New England. Shaquem Griffin going to Seattle. Marquez Valdez-Scantling going to Green Bay, the latter 2 in the 5th round. I did find it kind of interesting. Booker T. Washington out of Miami also had 3 players drafted, including 2 by the same team, Chad Thomas and Antonio Galloway, both going to Cleveland to try to be, well, I'm sure they will be future Browns. I am aware that in 1995, the Steelers made the Super Bowl with 2 players who played together, although not in the same class, from the same high school, Spring Valley High School in Columbia, South Carolina. That can only be beneficial to the Browns. I'm not ready to pick them to win the Super Bowl next year. But yeah, 2 players played together in high school, now reunited in the NFL. That could be big. Could be big. By the way, getting through this right now, other high schools with multiple players, none from around here, but they're from places like Callaway, Mississippi, Ringgold, Virginia, Philadelphia, Harbor City, California, Norcross, Georgia, Chesapeake, Virginia, Manassas, Virginia, Houston, Jacksonville, and Gardenia, California. Not really any great surprises there. But yeah, Tennessee with, the 5 players as compared to Florida with 7 times that drafted by the NFL. That's, one of the things, I talk about it all the time, how it is difficult to get players to play at the high level to beat an Alabama or a Florida when your state isn't producing that many. Now, the 5 players out of Tennessee that were part of the NFL draft, Hunter Bradley, he was a long snapper, went to Green Bay in the 7th round. He's from Collierville, nobody from the Tri-Cities, played at Mississippi State. Rashad Golden, he's from Independence, Tennessee, and he was drafted by the Carolina Panthers, who, by the way, were sold, or will be sold today. The Panthers in the 3rd round, Anthony Miller, 2nd-round pick of the Bears out of Memphis. Jordan Wilkins, 5th-round pick of the Colts out of Ole Miss. Cedric Wilson from Boise State was drafted by the Dallas Cowboys. He was from White Station High School, which has quite the reputation in the state, from Memphis. That's it. Only 1 Tennessee Volunteer, that being Golden from Independence, Thompson Stations High School. Reggie McKenzie was from California, going from Emory, and John Kelly, the other of all drafted, was from Michigan, Detroit area. So there you go. Virginia, 15 players. And this I also found very interesting, is that Virginia, why does Virginia Tech win? Well, they were keeping these quality players in state. Now, not every player would stay in state from Virginia, but 6 of them did go to Virginia Tech. Another one went to play for the Wahoos in Charlottesville, and still another The 6th-round pick of the Jets, running back Trenton Cannon, went to Virginia State. Other than that, you had mainly powerhouses, traditional powerhouses, I should say, the Florida States, the Ohio States, Alabama, that sort of thing for the Virginia schools. North Carolina, meanwhile, I also noticed the North Carolinians really stayed in North Carolina. 5 of them, of the 14 drafted, went to NC State, as well as Keon Crossan from Western Carolina, by the way, drafted in the 7th round by the Patriots. He is a defensive back, so Southern Conference fans can be happy about that. Brandon Parker, a tackle, went to North Carolina A&T. Only one Tar Heel. Austin Proehl, wide receiver, drafted by the Bills in the final round. So these guys are keeping it in state. You see, they're going to NC State. Maybe that's why David Durrell stayed with the Wolfpack. Thought it was easier to get those in-state recruits. Well, it had been, and that's just, another thing against the Vols. Jerry Bonkowski's next.
14